Today we'll be talking a little bit about my wall of sound, which is made up of a Warwick LWA 1000 watt head going into a Bergantino HT322 850 watt cabinet that has one 12-inch speaker, two 10-inch speakers, and a horn. This is a phenomenal sounding cabinet. Here I have the Ashdown Pi Bass, which is 260 watts going into a Bergantino CM210 Bergantino lightweight cabinet, rated at 400 watts RMS. This is a 10 watt Phil Jones bass buddy going into a Hotone 5-inch speaker rated at 10 watts, and the Ashdown CTM 15, which is a 15 watt head going into a Phil Jones Compact 4 cabinet, which is rated at 400 watts RMS. I frequently mix and match all of these, so it depends on what sound I'm looking for. Of course, this is a very tube sounding head, so regardless to what I plug it into, it still is going to maintain that depth that you get with tubes. This is a very vintage sounding head. This is a very vintage sounding cabinet, and both of these are really modern sounding cabinets as well. I've put a loop into my Boss RC300, and I have the signal going to all three amplifiers simultaneously. So let's give them a quick listen. So that's flat. You can hear the punch of the low end. You can hear the sizzle of the hi-hat. That is a very nice full range speaker. Next we'll move over to the Ashdown, which is very vintage. So that's very modern sounding. This is very vintage. As you can tell, you can't really hear the hi-hat or the snare unless you push the bright button, which gives it a much more modern sound. And here is the Ashdown tube amp. You can hear the hi-hat. I think part of that is due to the Phil Jones cabinet. And I'll just plug in really quickly here to reappropriate a lead. And then you can hear kind of the full rangeness that you get from the Phil Jones into the Hotone. This is my practice and travel rig. I really dig this one a lot. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about EQ, because the EQ on each of these is kind of voiced a little bit differently. I would guess that this one, that the Warwick and the Phil Jones are probably the closest. One's simply a rotary dial while the other one has sliders, and they're marked slightly differently. This one has shelving EQ and this one has passive EQ. So we'll go through each one of those and talk a little bit about them. So the Bergantino is marked low, low mid, mid, and treble. So cutting the bass. Boosting the bass. Cutting the low mid. Boosting the low mid. Cutting the mid. Boosting the mid. Cutting the high, which gives you a much more vintage sound. And boosting the high. All of these amps I generally run pretty flat. So next we'll take a look at the Pi Bass and how the shelving EQ works. shelving EQ works is that each one of these knobs for low, mid, and high is actually not your EQ control. What it is it sets the frequency. So if I boost the bass, this actually will adjust the frequency that gets adjusted. So the sliders work in conjunction. This tells you what the boost and the cut are for the bass and for the low mid and for the high mid. And the frequency knob basically tells you what frequency you're going to boost or cut. So we'll do this with the mid because I think you'll be able to hear it. So I'm going to cut the low mid all the way, raise the high mid, and just sweep through the frequencies. So as you can tell, with shelving EQ, you get a lot of variation in terms of what it is that you're looking at. This hash down has what's called passive EQ. So what's meant by passive EQ is this. When each one of the EQs is turned down, you get absolutely no sound. It's a complete cut. And so when you add, what you get is very subtle. So this is mid all the way up and mid cut. It's not that big of a difference. It's really more, passive in terms of its behavior. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is the gain. To me, and I swapped out the tubes and I revoiced it kind of the way that I wanted to. When you start rolling in the gain for this preamp section, it introduces high end. So if you listen, it becomes brighter. And then eventually it gets into distortion. And basically right now, the way that I have the pedal set up, it's not going to push this into a hard distortion, but I can push it into a hard distortion, and even with a limited EQ, I can get it more of a square wave or more of a sine wave, so that's pretty cool. And the bass buddy itself actually works the same way from an EQ perspective as the Warwick, so I'm not going to go into that. But its sliders are set at 50 hertz, 160 hertz, 630 hertz, 2.5 kilohertz, and 12 kilohertz. All right. So the next thing that I'm going to cover really quickly, because this has the potential of going long, now I'm going to add in some chords. So you can kind of hear how each one will handle the volume swell of the chords. You can hear how that's a little bit more full range, that cabinet. You hear that low end rumble that goes along with that. melodic line, so you can hear all that, how that works together. All right, so again, the Warwick is very modern, and what I like about it, over the mark bass, and I know there are a lot of mark bass fans out there, is that when the note attacks, it just completely hits fully. You know, there's some amps where when you hit the fundamental low note, it kind of blossoms, it goes and it blooms completely in. With this, the attack is immediate. So I actually really like that. Here, the attack is as well. And here, so that's what I like. I like a really modern sounding amp where the attack is very clean and clear. I actually had this head hooked up to this cabinet, but it was way too vintage sounding. This is a tube amp, so I have to power it off before I switch my cable. Oops. So you can see that's a little bit more vintage sounding to my ear. And then when you take the bright off, it's that really vintage sound that a lot of people like, particularly with the P-Bass. Anyway, that's my take on amplification. If you have any questions about speaker size or sound or why I chose whichever, please feel free, and I'll do my best to answer.